View panel session. Good afternoon. Welcome to the View panel session. This afternoon's topic is, does the law treat everyone equally? My name's Sarah Kirkpatrick. I'm the Chief Exec of Welsh Women's Aid in my day job. But I'm here today in a personal capacity because I think that both the View magazine and somebody's daughter and these important questions need to be answered. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce my fellow panelists, and hopefully we're going to have a discussion on whether the law does treat everyone equally, and if not, what steps we can take to address that. So first I would like to turn to Ryan. If you'd like to introduce yourself briefly. Ryan, I have you down as a Chief Executive and Life Skills Expert.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm based in the United States, and my company, Acceleron Learning, does work in corrections. We're in half a dozen different states, about 150 prison facilities in the United States, with a variety of curricula around life skills and reentry readiness. And we're actually just starting up in England and Wales through the Ministry of Justice, and we're going to have some programming available for release and release readiness here shortly.
Well, that sounds very exciting. I look forward to hearing a bit more about that. And next on my screen, it would be lovely if you would introduce yourself. Holly, who I have as a director or editorial director of the View magazine, but I wonder if you would introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm actually filling in for Claire at the last minute because she is rather ill and doesn't have a negative test. So this was, again, last minute fill-in. I have a background in forensic psychology, which is the bridge between law and psychology.
Okay, thank you, Holly. That's lovely. And last but absolutely not least, Jinder Singh, I have here that you're a judge. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm a circuit judge. I used to sit in the criminal courts up until about a year back. At the moment, I'm just doing civil cases, but I may be going back to do crime. I wrote an article, I was subject to an interview recently for the last edition of the View magazine. Hence, I'm here because I was interested in the work you guys do.
I completely understand where you're coming from. So I wonder, would anyone like to kick us off, or would you like me to pick on you about the question, does the law treat everyone equally? So I think perhaps nobody's diving in, so I am going to come to you first, Holly. Could you tell us a bit about your thoughts in terms of, does the law treat everyone equally? And I guess we're talking about criminal law here as opposed to civil law, but we can get into that later if we like.
In my opinion, no.
Okay.
There's a vast difference, sometimes according to the socioeconomic status of the person, in America in particular, and also a racial divide. Black people, for example, tend to be incarcerated for much longer and for smaller crimes than white. And women, in particular, I mean, in parts of the country, there has been a movement towards prison reform in that women with children can often do like a halfway house program so that they can still spend time with their families rather than incarcerated for the full length of their sentence. It's like a jail release program, but it's only for very minor offenses. For greater offenses such as drug possession, they tend to be incarcerated.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I come to you, Jinder, next. Would that be all right? Do you think?
Yeah.
So you sit in a slightly different chair, don't you?
Yeah, I do. But I need to make clear, I'm here only in a personal capacity, not in a professional capacity. And I don't wish to express any views that could be deemed political because of my job. There's a strict demarcation, separation of powers between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. And I can't be seen to be discussing matters from a perspective which could be deemed political. But what I can do is give you a personal perspective.
I think it would be wonderful to give a personal perspective, and then I might follow up and ask you why there are such clear laws, clear rules, because I think that might be so revealing. If that's all right.
Well, there is absolutely no doubt, 100% I can tell you, that the law in theory is completely neutral. There is no gender-based bias, racial, religious, any form of bias. There is none within the law itself. The application, however, that's where there may be difficulties. Me personally, I cannot even imagine discriminating in the application of the law. So I have the theoretical law, then the application. And the reason for that is because a lot of the people who appear before me and I sentence, I'm from the same background. I'm from a background where I'm the first person in my family to have gone to university. I went to a state school in the middle of a council estate where the majority of the children were on free school meals. I wasn't, but the majority of the other pupils were. Many of them were in the care sector. So my own view, when I sit and sentence others, is but for the grace of God, there's me, the other side of the dock. And what I have is a strong sense of a conscience. So even from an entirely selfish perspective, were I to apply the law in a discriminatory way, and I'm saying this now from a completely selfish perspective, when I go home, I will not be able to sleep. So for my own well-being, I cannot discriminate. I hope that makes sense. But the figures, however, I accept, and I think Holly hit the nail on the head with regard to the American figures. There are figures in this country which suggest there is a disparity. For example, the number of Black young men who are sentenced to prison in proportion to the population or in proportion to the numbers appearing in the criminal justice system, in contrast with their white and Asian counterparts, that appears to be greater. But the Lamy report looked into that, and the recommendation was for greater diversity amongst the judiciary. So that may be an issue there, but like I said, I can only speak from a personal perspective.
Thank you so much. Ryan, what are your sort of opening thoughts?
Yeah, so, it's certainly the comment that the intent or design of the law is being neutral. I agree with that. The application of the law is sort of the intermediate step, but then there's a third part, which is the consequences or repercussions of that in a person's life and based on their personal circumstance and situation. And some of those factors are controllable. Some of those things are choices that people make, but some of those things are not. They're external to the person. And so, when you think about, does the law treat everyone fairly? I think you have to think in terms of the law's design, its application, and then the consequences of the law. And all three parts, I think it's very easy when we get into these sorts of conversations to, not consider each part independently and what is to be done about each phase, if you will, of that process.
Thanks, Ryan. An interesting thing that I noticed you said, does the law treat everyone fairly? And the question is, does the law treat everyone equally?
Yeah, so obviously
it really just made me smile on the inside, the idea that, we often see fairness as something very close to equalness. So equality always feels like a really good thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Before the panel, I was actually thinking about that distinction between equal and fair, and how those are not quite the same thing. And certainly, when we think about due process, right, we're trying to achieve a kind of equality in terms of application of the law. And I think, you know, from a human perspective, what we hope for is fairness, right? But that is something distinct.
Indeed, it's an interesting thought. So I guess the next part of our conversation, having all of you sort of identified that while the law is written in a neutral manner, which is designed to give equal justice under the law, what we see is a disparity of how that justice is delivered for people in different spaces and from different ethnic groups, from different migrant statuses. And I would also, from my own perspective, I would highlight that the way justice is administered looks very different for men and for women. And the proportion of people that are prosecuted seems very different. So I was wondering, we've all had a bit of time to sort of prepare for this panel session. There's no point in just answering the question, do we think that the law does the law treat people equally and fairly? The next question has to be, if we could change it, what would you change? So what do you think might help improve the justice system to facilitate it treating people more equally? And I'd be really grateful if one of you wanted to dive in before I pick on someone.
I could take a go at it, sure.
Go on then.
Yeah, so, you know, as it's going to become very evident if it hasn't already, I'm a process-oriented person. And so, you know, obviously you think about what can be done preventatively on the front end, what can be done in terms of when somebody becomes justice involved, that things are done right in the right way as they enter the justice system, as they're in it, and as they exit. And so, again, I'm thinking in terms of process that each one of those requires some improvement. And so in the United States here, you know, there's obviously a lot of talk around sentencing reform, minimum sentencing guidelines, the way that plea bargains are handled, all of those sorts of things on the front end of the process. During incarceration, in terms of having an orientation around rehabilitation rather than around, you know, punishment, if you will. And then upon exit, providing links back into the local community and support mechanisms that enable people to make that transition successfully and have sort of a safety net available to them. And so I think conceptually, you know, there's a lot of work in each of those areas, but the problem is that it's such a massive undertaking, and there's so many reciprocal effects among those things that achieving some sort of, you know, a symphony, if you will, amongst all of those disparate parts is extremely difficult to do.
Gosh, it sounds like you're presenting as many challenges as you are ideas, but thank you so much, Ryan. I wonder if I could turn to you.
Well, I can expand on that a little bit. And studies have shown that rehabilitation programs in prisons, such as parenting classes, anger management classes, drug abuse classes, has really resulted in a much lower rate of recidivism, for one, and two, has helped ease the transition into civilian life after incarceration. The barriers obviously are the cost of the program, finding people who can implement the programs, and also getting specific prisons to support the program. But when they have been used, it's been tremendous success. And it's also resulted in shorter sentences if inmates agree to participate in programs for parenting or drug rehabilitation or whatever related to their sentence usually is or can be shortened because they show progress. And the prisons are overcrowded as it is.
Okay, thank you, Holly. I wonder if there's anything that you would add in there, Jinder, or whether you would mind if I sort of pitched in at that point. Would that be all right with everyone? I'm very conscious that I am both chair, but last minute chair, and I would love to join in the conversation if that was all right.
Of course.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Because it strikes me that both Ryan and Holly, you've talked about once people are within the justice system and how we process them through the justice system and how they come out the other side, and sort of the likelihood of recidivism and such things. And I guess for me, one of my wonders and the journey I went on in my head when I thought about does the law treat everyone equally was not once I'd managed to get someone convicted and incarcerated, but actually that entry point, that question of does everyone have equal access to justice? Do we actually push everybody through the same sausage machine? I completely understand that rehabilitation programs have a really powerful impact for some people, but only some people will ever be exposed to those rehabilitation programs because only some people actually are dealt that hand by the justice system. So while as someone who's formerly worked on rehabilitation programs, I think they have a huge value. I'm just thinking about how we target our interventions at a certain group and whether that is fair and equitable. So yeah, it's really interesting to sort of hear the way that both of you went for that rehabilitation aspect that I think is hugely powerful. And I guess that was where my head went. So with that little ramble, I shall turn to you, Jinder, and see where you're thinking in terms of what could we do to make the world, or to make the justice a little more equal.
Okay, now going back to what I said earlier, I can't say anything that can be deemed political, but can I just say something about my personal experience? My experience is about 80% of the people who come to the criminal courts and get themselves or have found themselves in difficulties with crime, the police, the underlying cause is drugs and or alcohol.
Yeah.
Now, and I think even 80% may be an underestimate. Now, my own view is we should be looking at crime not simply as a behavioral, but also as a societal problem, and be looking at it as a public health issue as well as a law enforcement issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add in terms of statistics, certainly in the United States, in addition to the drug issue, mental health alongside it, or if not being sort of a precursor, the drug use is oftentimes a coping mechanism for mental health issues. And so when we think about sort of the front end of this, it's as much about mental health care and access to programs and everything that goes on from that vantage point before people turn to substance abuse as a coping mechanism, which then puts them into, all of the things.
The public health approach to the recognition of harm so that people don't end up within the justice system is what might make a significant change.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any more ideas in terms of how did it get to be so unequal? Has it always, I mean, if it wasn't designed that way.
I think if we're living in, and I think we can all accept we're living in an unequal world. If we're living in an unequal world, then we're going to have unequal outcomes. Because the reason why the vast majority of people who find themselves in difficulties with law enforcement are from perhaps the lowest 10-20% of the social economic strata of society, is because that's the strata of society who has the fewest opportunities.
Right.
That's the strata of society where people are most likely to be in care, where there's likely to be issues regarding whether both parents are in the same household, where there's difficulties with feeding themselves, drug dependency, mental health. So I think the inequality can often start, I mean, I'm not sure which psychologist performed the study, but there was a study, I think from the United States from the 1960s, where it was found the die was cast with most children by the time they'd reached the age of 6, in terms of their future progression in life.
Gosh, not entirely cast, is it?
No, there's exceptions, but unfortunately, if you have disadvantage in your very early years, it puts others in a position of having such a head start in front of you. It's very difficult to catch up with them.
I'll give a real life example here. As part of what we're developing for England and Wales, we did a series of interviews with prison leavers, people who've been through the justice system. And I spoke with a woman who had been in care as a child and ended up in a youth facility and then ended up in an adult facility. So she had been interacting with the justice system and the social work system for her entire life. And we were talking specifically about her time in the youth facility, and this was a ways back. So I know that hopefully reforms are underway and ongoing, but her commentary was that as a child or a young person who is incarcerated, what she really most needed was a parent. And the way that the system was designed and the way that she was treated and interacted with in the facility, it was very rule-based or very situation-specific, but she needed guidance, she needed parenting is fundamentally what she said. And so there's an orientation in terms of how we interact with people who are justice involved that fundamentally should shift. And I think that there's an awareness that it needs to shift, but it's not happening nearly fast enough.
So early intervention.
Absolutely.
I mean, starting when people are children, if they're from a single parent family, if one parent is incarcerated, if they're not going to have the advantages, maybe there can be programs designed to help them further along. I mean, there used to be big brothers and big sisters. There used to be much more of a social net than there is now. And that's going back like 50 years. In the last 40, 30 years, those programs have pretty much disappeared.
Yeah, there's a confluence of all of these external factors when you think about the way that everything's moved online and the way that people interact socially online, that face-to-face interaction, and just even children getting out and meeting people face-to-face and being involved face-to-face with others. I mean, that's why those mentoring programs and some of those sorts of safety nets are not as effective as they used to be, just because of cultural change and the way that we all interact has changed.
Very good point.
It's certainly changed over the last 18 months dramatically. I think we wouldn't have been doing this 18 months ago. But yeah, it's a really valid point, isn't it? That people interact in different ways. I think it's an interesting idea that the early intervention that you were talking about, Holly, and you were talking about this idea that the early intervention for particular target groups. So how would you see that might help in terms of the law treating everyone equally down the end of the road?
Because it would open up opportunities. I mean, as Singh said, life can be, by the time someone is 6, I mean, if they're born into poverty, if they're born to uneducated parents, if they're born into a broken family or a family with a drug addict, I mean, they already may be on a path to a lesser life than perhaps someone who was born into more privilege. But like there's a program called Bright Beginnings. But it's not available everywhere to everyone, and that I think part of the problem, because giving that opportunity to some but not all, again, some people down one path and allows other people to take another path. So if there were a social safety net of some kind that was more generally available, that might change the trajectory of the children's lives going forward.
Okay, it's an exciting thought. I'm going to throw it out there and see what you think, because I think that's my job as chair. So Jinder, you mentioned earlier that the people that you see coming through the justice system appear to be coming, they're disproportionately representing a lower socioeconomic class. And Holly, you were mentioning about those who are born into privilege. So my question to all of you really is, does affluence equate to privilege? And is it affluence that actually alters your experience of the law?
I would say no. There's a correlation between affluence and privilege, in the sense that if you have money, it opens up greater opportunities in life. For example, one of the great ways of ensuring mobility is education. And if you have the means to send your child to a private school, that opens up huge opportunities. For example, there's a greater or a lower pupil teacher ratio. And of course, because the children you're being educated with are themselves going to be the children of successful parents, there's going to be opportunities in the future to make connections to help you get jobs and get yourselves into top universities.
Right.
So I think that there's certainly a correlation, but I certainly don't think affluence is the same as privilege. I think the best privilege is to be brought up in a secure, loving environment. And that's not unique to wealthy parents and wealthy families.
I love the way you said that. Thank you so much. What about somebody else sort of diving in on the end of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that he said, and it was well put. You can certainly see criminality among any social class or any economic strata. So I don't think that, there's a one-to-one relationship there at all, but certainly access to opportunity, as he said, is a key difference. And I think one of the things to think about, obviously, cost constraint is one of the biggest problems or issues with providing rehabilitative programming or preventive programming to people. And so, the orientation that you have to take, and what we have done as a company is to always think about everything in terms of what is scalable. What is the most scalable thing that we can do that is the most cost effective to provide people opportunity and access to things that they may not otherwise have. And one of the things that's frustrating to me as I look at programming efforts within the justice system is that you see pockets of things that are well intended, but they don't scale, and they're not thought of or designed in terms of scale. And so even if it works really well with a very limited cohort of people, there's always the lingering question of, okay, well, how do we apply this more broadly, or how do we ramp this up? And if it's not thought about correctly from the beginning in terms of the program design and in terms of the cost of implementation, it doesn't matter how good the program is, because you can't get it into the hands of people who need it.
So perhaps then the question becomes, how do you get it into the hands?
Oh, did your voice suddenly drop at the end there? I think I heard the beginning of you said, so the question becomes, how do we get it into the hands of the people that need it? Was there more to say, Holly?
Well, I have an answer to that. It's not a perfect answer, but it's a running start, which is we have this wonderful thing called technology. And so, you know, when you think about, I'll make a very simple example. In the state of Texas, where we do a tremendous amount of work, there's a lot of classroom-based face-to-face instruction. And when you think about 100 prison facilities, which that's approximately how many there are in Texas alone, that says something about criminal justice in the United States. But when you have 100 facilities in Texas alone, and you are physically shuffling people between facilities because certain facilities offer program A and certain facilities offer program B. And if you need access to program B, you have to be bused and relocated at that facility. There's a tremendous opportunity to improve that with tablets, right? Putting a device in people's hands, designing programming that can be consumed individually in a cell or in a small group setting. I don't think you can offload all instruction to technology. I think that there's a blended model between face-to-face group interaction and use of technology for information transfer. But using the technology that we have can scale education and programming in tremendous ways. And there's a lot of things going on in corrections that are dabbling with that, but implementation of that at scale and really committing to that is a huge shift in the way that things have been delivered in correctional settings. And it's starting to happen, and certainly COVID, I think, has created a lot of momentum where there was not. And so that's good, but that is a very easy, cost-effective way to scale.
An exciting idea, and certainly you're right. COVID for me, I've seen some sort of dramatic opportunities. In terms of putting opportunity in people's hands, do you think? I know that we mentioned a little bit earlier about sort of taking a public health approach and taking a prevention approach. I often look at narratives around rehabilitative programs, which take a very deficits-based perspective, as if we have to pour skills, knowledge, and wisdom into the ears of people who are lacking in those things. And certainly my interactions with people who have transgressed is that it's not that they don't know, but that they are making least worst choices in the face of no good answer. And that actually it is an environment that they live in, not all of the time, absolutely not all of the time, but some of the time, the reason that people are committing offences isn't because they don't have any, it isn't because they don't know better, it's because that's the best answer that they've got. And so where we talk about programming and rehabilitation that helps someone function better in an environment, do we have to have a conversation about the environment? And because that people cannot afford to do things, that people see affluent role models who are very able to avoid paying tax, for example. So if I can afford an excellent accountant, then I can reduce my tax burden significantly. Those things send a message that says it is acceptable. So is there something about the environment that we send our rehabilitated or our potential offenders into that would reduce their experience, do you think?
Sarah, I certainly think there's a lot to be said for having like a mentoring scheme. Now, I'm not sure whether or not any of the other discussion members are aware that up until a few years back, if you were a child in social care, come 18, you were treated immediately as an adult. So one day before your 18th birthday, you were a child. On your 18th birthday, you were an adult and expected to fend for yourself. So you come from an environment where a lot of things are done for you. Sometimes everything's done for you, to a situation where nothing is done for you. Now, if you think about ourselves, where if you have parents looking after you, that doesn't happen, because you can be treated as a child age 16, you can be treated as a child age 22, because your parents don't stop treating you as a child, but institutions do. Now, one of the main issues where there's drug dependency, abuse backgrounds, social services backgrounds, is we still have this attitude that you have youth offenders and adult offenders, and then youth offenders to be treated like children, adults as adults. But I don't think that applies where you have people coming from a system which is the care system. So if we now adapt the criminal justice system and law enforcement to what's happening now in social services, where there's continuing obligations beyond the age of 18 in the form of a mentoring scheme. So you have people keeping an eye on you and often helping financially, and certainly helping, for example, finding a home, opening up a bank account, helping you set up utility accounts, which of course parents tend to with their children. If we had a similar mentoring scheme for people who come into contact with the criminal justice system or being released from prison, that, it seems to me, may be one way forward.
I'm sitting here nodding enthusiastically. I'm thinking about some of the through the gate schemes that they do have. But yeah, but it is relational and doesn't just drop people. And yeah, you're right. The children's services a few years ago did just stop. And that's really hard. So I wonder, Ryan, Holly, what are your thoughts on that sort of relational mentoring type approach?
I think that is a wonderful, wonderful idea, because it's absolutely correct that once you hit 18 in the foster care system, you're on your own. And just as Jinder pointed out, a lot of these, they do need a parent. And so a mentoring system, or even this is a post-incarceration pathway house setting that's more of a family type thing, headed by perhaps two parents, might also be a really good system to teach people to get a job, to pay their utility bills, find an apartment. Because a lot of criminals just start small. I mean, muggings or robberies or whatever. And really, being taught how to fend for themselves, I think, would make a huge difference in their lives.
Thank you. Ryan?
I mean, I think anytime you have a positive influence in your life who's a little further along, who has more life experience, who potentially has been through similar circumstances and come out on the other side of it, if you have that as a reference point, your outcomes are going to probably be better, because you have that element of hope. You have somebody that you can look to as, something aspirational based on what they've achieved. It seems accessible, because if they're coming from a similar circumstance, it doesn't feel like it's so far removed from your own life experience. And so, yeah, I agree completely. I think I think the thing is, a lot of those mentoring programs, they're bookended, right? So it's either before or after incarceration. During incarceration, I'm really not aware of too many formal mentoring programs that exist in facilities. And so, certainly identifying, by whatever systematic means, people who are qualified and have the right character attributes or the right dispositions to take on that role, I think that would be a huge benefit. Yeah, I think back again to that one of those interviews that I did with the prison leavers, and the comment was, they had been in a youth facility and went to an adult facility, and she said, surprisingly, she was very relieved to be in an adult facility and much preferred that setting because there were people who could speak into her life and provide her guidance, who were older and wiser and had something to offer to help sort of take her under their wing. And so there's certainly something to that.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, I'm very conscious that as we discussed in the chat bar, we are going to sort of round up towards the 5 p.m. mark, if that's okay with you all. And so I was wondering if it might be a nice way to sort of conclude this session would be a sort of a just 3 things wish list. So if I gave you the opportunity to do just 3 things, and you're not allowed to say the process things, Ryan, if you could do just 3 things that you think might change the system a bit, what would you do? And Holly, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm going to go last. But yeah, just 3 things that you think might be able to sort of make radical change and bring some equality to the legal system.
We discussed intervention, mentoring, and follow-up so that people don't just drop off the radar or out of the system, but like a continuing relationship.
Thank you so much. Okay, Ryan. Oh, I look like
Yeah.
you look like you're writing down.
I know, I'm just collecting my thoughts. I mean, the 3 things in my mind are leadership. What I see is a huge deficit of leadership in DOCs. There are certainly cases where you have good, strong leadership and people who are bold and decisive. But I also I can think of many, many examples of very weak, timid leadership or a lack of direction. And so having leadership at the top of these organizations and have that carry through is extremely important to affecting change. The second thing is, I go back to, is it scalable and cost effective? And the third thing that I think is so important is rapid hypothesis testing. So the analogy that I like to give is, why is Elon Musk okay with blowing up 30 or 40 rockets at the cost of untold millions and billions of dollars? And the answer is because by blowing up 30 or 40 rockets, you're going to figure out quickly what works, and you're okay with trying things and failing or making mistakes and trying again and trying again. And I think that obviously, these are human beings, right? It's not a piece of machinery. So you have to have the right perspective on that. But there is a great hesitation to try new things. And there's a great hesitation to maybe make a mistake or, and so by having a mentality of rapid hypothesis testing, particularly in public-private partnership, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to start to do things that make sense.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Jinder?
Okay, what Ryan just said, he's expressed himself so well, but I can't comment. That's too political for me, okay, to comment on. But Holly's made my job very easy because I'm going to adopt everything she says. But I want to add one thing. I would love, again, I'm speaking now from a personal perspective, I would love if every single person I sentenced to prison, I was required to meet after they were released, and they can then explain to me what effect it had on them. I think that would be so enlightening for judges.
Oh, that is lovely. And that, yeah, thank you so much. All three of you, thank you so, so much. I'm going to give you my three. So I think for me, shared social values. I think that we have a society which has different social values, and that we demonize and diminish some people's social values. And I think that that's a massive problem, and that we should all be more cohesive and value them. I think that we have to take a prevention rather than cure approach. So I think some of the things that you've said during the session today have really made me feel so very heartened that actually our journey towards a more robust justice is not just about within the legal system, but that justice should go beyond the legal system. And I guess that my third thing is that we have to name the problem. And for me, the reason that the justice system doesn't treat people equally is because our society is rife with inequality. And that's the problem. The problem is not that there's something wrong with the law. The problem is that there's something wrong with our society, and there's something wrong with our value set that is seen within the law. But actually, if we went and looked at schools, it's seen in schools too. If we went and looked in the health system, it's seen in the health system too. So the problem is the values and the system, not justice or whichever other bit we look at. So those would be my three things. I'm very conscious of all of your time and how valuable this session has been, certainly for me, and I hope that the audience, when they get to watch it, really enjoy it. So thank you so much, all of you, for your time today, for joining, for being supportive of the View magazine. I hope that you will continue to appreciate the magazine going forwards. I hope that you have an opportunity to see the exhibition, Someone's Daughter. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you so much. I'm going to call this panel session to a close.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for coming. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.